Hello, and welcome to the Dance Physio Podcast, a podcast designed to explore ideas and foster discussion around dancer health and wellness. We're here to challenge the status quo, bridge the gap between dance science and the studio, and help change the landscape of the dance industry for the better. I'm your host, Erica Mayall, a dancer turned physiotherapist who is deeply passionate about leaving the dance world better than I found it. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dance Physio Podcast. I am your host, Erica Mayall, and I am very excited to be here today with a guest to introduce you all to. I have with me today Anna Morgan, who you may know, especially if you are active on social media and maybe you follow her on Instagram. Anna is an educator, choreographer, adjudicator, and researcher working mainly within ballet. Her choreography has been presented worldwide with recent work in the US, France, Puerto Rico, and at Sadler as well as in London. She has taught for institutions including the Royal Ballet School, Bird College, and Performers College, and adjudicates for All England Dance. She also sits on the advisory board for the Tired Movement. Anna has recently completed the MA course at Royal Ballet School, where her research focuses on gender equity in ballet leadership and training. She shared this research widely through lectures, digital content, and professional development seminars, including very recently as a speaker at the IADMS conference in Las Vegas. Anna remains deeply committed to elevating the culture of dance, both in educational settings and the professional industry. Her vision encompasses dancers attaining standards of excellence within a more compassionate, inclusive, and progressive dance community. So welcome to the podcast, Anna. I am so excited that you are here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, so we finally got the chance to meet just recently, a few weeks ago at IADMS in Las Vegas, but I've been following you online for ages and always love your content and have been sort of following your research with interest. And so I'm really excited to get to dive into that a little bit today and sort of talk a bit about what you have found and sort of the lens that you are looking at things through right now. But before we dive into that, can you take us back to the beginning and sort of tell me a little bit about how you got into dance, or like how you kind of fell in love with dance, or what your story is?
Yeah, of course. So the classic kind of mum took me to dance classes when I was 2 or 3 and just never really stopped. And also was one of those people who my interests were so multi-layered and I loved doing so many different things, and did find it quite confusing that I was always kind of told you had to pick one pathway, and I wasn't sure that dance was everything I wanted to do, but I didn't want to not dance. But I also loved writing and finding things out, and so many other different things, which ironically now my career kind of encompasses all of those things, and I've sort of made that work. But I was training quite seriously by the time I was in my teenage years, and then had some years performing and teaching and lots of injuries, which kind of pushed me more into the teaching spaces. And then in recent years, I've moved into sort of advocacy work and research, as well as choreography and teaching and all the things. So yeah, I'd say I have a portfolio career now, whereby I get to do loads of different things that I love under the umbrella of ballet.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's one of the things I really love about dance in general is I think a lot of times for younger dancers, as they're coming up, there's like this idea that the only option for them in the dance world is to become a professional dancer. And I think now we're seeing so much more evidence of all the different things that you can do and still stay involved in the dance world, whether that be, advocacy work or choreography or research or healthcare or all sorts of other things. And I think that it's really neat to see that sort of evolve over the years, because it used to be, if you weren't going to dance professionally, you were going to teach. And if you danced professionally, then you were going to teach afterwards as well. Mm-hmm. So those were kind of like the only options, but there's so much more that is available. So your research focuses on gender equity in ballet leadership and training. And I'm curious how that became a focus for you, if that was something that you've always been really passionate about, or like how that evolved.
Yeah, so I've been passionate about feminist issues for a long time, and obviously passionate about ballet for a long time. But probably the point where those two things came together was, well, I can think of one pivotal moment, which was in 2016, and I went to see English National Ballet. They were doing a production called She Said, and it was a triple bill with 3 women choreographers. And at the time, Tamara Rojo was the artistic director and principal dancer. And she said that she'd commissioned this production because in her whole career, she'd never danced anything choreographed by a woman. And she was really at the tail end of her performing career at this point and had been dancing for, over 20 years professionally. And so I just thought, how is this possible?
Possible, yeah, that's wild.
Exactly. And I think I maybe just hadn't really noticed, which seems to be the case with a lot of people I speak to, because it's such a female dominated industry in terms of when you look around most ballet spaces, there are predominantly women or girls. And so most of my teachers had been women. I was used to seeing women in positions of authority. So it just hadn't occurred to me that these particular artistic leadership positions, and the ones I really look at are the artistic director and choreographer positions, they were mostly, and still are, predominantly taken up by men. So I think it was that moment that kind of switched on the light bulb for me a little bit. And then I started just delving into anything that I could and getting really, really interested in it. And then at a sort of different time, I started thinking about maybe studying for an MA, and the two things kind of came together that would be my research specialism.
Amazing. Yeah. And it is such an interesting thing to think about because, like you said, I don't think we think necessarily a lot, like at least personally, when I'm like going and watching dance and especially ballet, I don't always think a ton about the choreographers in particular and sort of think about like, is this female, is this male, or like what lens you're looking at it through. And our local ballet company, I think it was last season, it might have even been the season before, they had a performance that ended up falling on like International Women's Day or like around that time. And so they were like, we're going to do like a bill that's all women choreographers. But even then there was a male choreographer involved because it was like a pair that was like a partnership, like female. And so even then I was like, really, we couldn't just go like entirely female. We'll just like, yeah, exactly. Stick this little, like, stick the man in and hope that nobody notices. And we're still going to like publicize it as this like International Women's Day bill. But I was like, I don't know. We kind of, anyway, it's a bit of an aside. At your presentation at IADMS, you had some interesting stats that I don't know that they surprised a ton of people in the room, but kind of when you're like, faced with these statistics, it makes it even more obvious what we're talking about in terms of leadership positions and stuff. I think some listeners out there may actually be surprised by some of these statistics. So can you share those with us?
Yeah, of course. So as part of my research, I wanted to be able to compare in the UK the kind of gender ratios within ballet training compared to our leadership. So whenever I'm talking about the leadership, I'm referring to our 5 largest ballet companies here in the UK, which is the Royal Ballet, Birmingham Royal Ballet, English National Ballet, Scottish Ballet, and Northern Ballet. And so when I surveyed ballet teachers in the UK, and we were looking at just over 7,500 ballet students under the age of 18, we discovered that 7% of those were cis boys. So we're looking at 92% cis girls and then 1% that fell into a non-binary, trans, or sort of otherwise gender diverse category. And yet when we flipped and looked at the professional industry, in those 5 companies, 100% of the artistic directors are men. And, that's 5 positions. So people might argue, well, it's a coincidence for 2025. But when we look at the choreographer positions, where I trawled through hundreds of different pieces that these 5 ballet companies have presented within the last 4 years, and it came out that 83% of the work that had been shown in those 4 years, so kind of since the pandemic, were choreographed by men, and there was no evidence of anyone non-binary, trans, or otherwise gender diverse in the artistic director or choreographer roles. So we kind of flipped from this 7% of boys in our ballet classes to the vast majority of the work that we're seeing and the artistic direction of companies being through the male lens. So I'm just, looking into why and how and what do we do about that?
Absolutely. And why do you think that is? Like, what, did you kind of start to dive into that? Or like, I know obviously we have theories and opinions about it, but I'd be curious to hear your why.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a bit of a funnel or a pipeline, really, in terms of how we move through this journey. So I think it all starts off with society and the Western culture's prejudices and thoughts about who should be doing what in terms of gender. So Western society is ultimately still homophobic and misogynistic. And so the idea that the average person has is that ballet is for girls. So that ends up with less boys going into ballet, hence why we have that 7% only. Most ballet classes around the world, as I'm sure we all know who are in this world, are made up of little girls. Mm-hmm. So it starts off with the fact that there are very few boys going into ballet in the first place. So rather than like in other minority groups where they can get treated very poorly and being ostracized, in ballet, that minority group, the flip side happens, and actually they get treated as very special. They're like a precious commodity, and we're really conscious as teachers because we know that these boys are very likely having a terrible time outside of the studio because of their participation in ballet, and we're really empathetic towards that because it's terrible and we're so frustrated by it, and we can't believe we're still having to hear that they're dealing with this in 2025. So as teachers, we tend to kind of mollycoddle the boys, give them all these special opportunities. And even at, your local dance school level, regardless of talent, if you've got a boy, he's most likely centre front in every piece with two girls, on each hand. And it's just what people expect. So he's getting all these opportunities, but then that becomes more serious as we're getting into vocational school level, where, of course, there's more scholarships available. Again, there's lots of evidence in the research that I've done of boys then being treated differently. So they're given more praise, they're given more opportunities, they're allowed to get away with a lot more. So uniform expectations, behaviour, things that for a girl would be absolutely not okay. But, he's okay, he's just being cheeky or whatever. A lot of those behaviours they can get away with. So they're continuously empowered. What was this, thing that was probably really done with good intentions for this young boy in his local dance school to encourage him, it becomes then this kind of over empowerment where these boys are made to feel that they do have leadership potential, that they are able to do that. And meanwhile, the girls are made to feel very much like they are replaceable and irrelevant, and they need to conform. That all then goes into the professional companies. They're in the corps de ballet, where again, conformity is really, really key to everything that's going on. And the male dancers will have more opportunity to interact with leaders and to have more autonomy over what they do. It's a more tried and tested career path that men go into choreography and women tend to go into teaching, which is that caregiving role. So again, it's looking at what society thinks women versus men should be doing. And that then becomes a vicious loop because there are so few men working at recreational level as teachers. So the boys then don't have any representation there. And the cycle continues. Most boys won't see a male teacher unless they get into kind of a vocational level training. So this vicious loop happens. And the other aspect of all of this is, of course, the traditional way that ballet is taught, very kind of hierarchical, be silent, be conforming, just do what you're told, be a good girl is often kind of the vibe. And that's impressed more upon the girls than it is upon the boys. They aren't being nurtured as these creative whole people. And then the final bit, which is kind of, the part that I really spoke about at the IADAMS conference, is that we are training in this ultra binary way where girls do this and boys do this. And of course, that really doesn't suit anybody that falls outside of that gender binary or wishes to transition. So any of your trans students, your non-binary students, gender diverse students, find ballet often very inaccessible and unwelcoming and a place that they can't be authentic. But also, even for cis dancers, it further instills this idea that girls should be one way. It's not just that it's girls or boys, it's that this type of girl and this type of boy, hyper ultra masculine versus dainty and quiet and feminine. So we're doubling down on that idea that there is a correct way to be feminine and a correct way to be masculine. And so I'm sort of saying, let's just rethink and start from scratch and think of ballet as a technique that we can have, that we then put stories on top of, and those stories can and should be told by all sorts of different people from different backgrounds.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's like lots to unpack in that. And we're going to come back to this idea of like that sort of, gender binary. And I think to your point, when we think about little boys, especially, or younger boys dancing and some of maybe the bullying and things like that they're exposed to, I think some of that does come back then to that like really strict sort of like gendered binary. And so if we did have a little bit more openness, and you see it in other styles of dance, if we think about more street styles and hip hop and stuff, like there isn't that, and you see higher or more equal participation across genders in other styles of dance. And so the fact that, younger boys are not necessarily drawn to dance as much is because of some of those like very stereotypical, like, binaries that exist, especially in ballet. I had another thought while you were talking too. Oh, the other thing, and I'm not sure if you like looked into this at all, but in my experience here, a lot of male dancers start much, much later. And so they may not even start until they're 15, 16, 18 sometimes is when they discover it. And they still have the ability to like have a professional career or even, become choreographers and things like that. Whereas for girls, there's this narrative, and whether it's true or not, because I don't necessarily agree with it, but there is this sort of narrative that if you, haven't specialized in ballet, especially by the time you're like 7 or 8 years old, it's too late. You're a lost cause. There's no hope and all of this stuff. And the boys very much don't get treated the same way.
Exactly. And, I'm much more specialized in the sort of ethical side of it. But from what I do know from the physical side of it, we know that early specialization is not a positive thing, and that there's so many risk factors involved in that. But as you say, the narrative is that that's just necessary for girls because there's so much competition, but the boys can get away with it a little bit later. But you're absolutely right that there's lots of evidence to show that on average, boys will start ballet a lot later than girls, again, because it's not the natural thing that you send your son to. You here in the UK, little girls go to ballet and boys do football or rugby, and that's just kind of the norm. So maybe it would be later in the day when you realize, oh, okay, my son actually really likes being expressive and dance and using his body and telling stories. I'll put him in ballet classes. But it's not the default thing that people tend to do. Yeah. So yes, they're starting later. And the research shows as well that that's relevant because of these hierarchical traditional teaching methods that are used, those girls are often getting 10 plus years of that kind of treatment before the boy has even entered the ballet studio.
Yeah.
And then secondly, there's evidence to suggest that the teacher actually changes their teaching approach when a boy comes in. Like all of a sudden, we've got to make it more fun because we don't want to lose him. We've got to make it more creative. So even when he does come, he's not necessarily having the same treatment that the girls have been subjected to. So again, all those things play into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely very multi-layered. And like you said, it's like society as well as then like the actual ballet world and the dance world, kind of layering things on top of that.
Exactly.
I would love to dive into, so you're kind of proposing a little bit of a gender non-specific sort of pedagogical model for ballet training. And I would love to dive into a little bit more about what you sort of mean by that and what the main principles of that would be. Because I think a lot of people, this idea of like, wait, how do we get rid of the binary is very jarring or alarming, or they just simply are like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like we still have to have, you know, the female and the male for partnering and for all of those things. So what would the like kind of main principles of that be?
Yeah, so I propose, and, you know, again, this is pulling together lots of other people's ideas. This is not by any means my own concept, but it's just having done all the research that I now have, this is the one that I believe is the most feasible and the most sustainable for us to maintain ballet in the modern generation. So I propose that to start with, we just learn ballet. It's a technique, it's a manner of storytelling, it's an art form. It doesn't need to have any gender layered on top of it. So when you are going to your local ballet school, a plie is a plie. We're looking at this story today. We're looking at this story today. And there's options and there's no reason, we're not cancelling anything. If you want to have fairies, if you want to have soldiers, if you want to have anything. But it's, you know, it's crazy that we always put the little boys as soldiers when literally women can be in the military. It's, you know, so it's, you know, it's just expanding upon everything and not assigning things in a gendered way. And then as we move, you know, if a student did move through to a sort of more full-time setting, that they would start to have a go at lots of different specialisms. So within anything that is sort of safe and appropriate for them, they would all try either point or pre-point, partnering in both roles. And, you know, we're not talking about everybody lifting overhead because these students might be young teenagers. They wouldn't be safely doing that anyway, but learning to assist pirouettes both ways round, because it's one thing to pirouette, but how much better are you going to be at it if you understand how your partner is actually assisting you in that, and vice versa. Choreography, big turns and jumps, which is often the thing in my research that the women and girls often are saying, I just want to be doing the big jumps and the exciting stuff. And so everybody tries a little bit of everything. And then in those latter years of pre-professional training, you would seek specialisms. So just like a medical student would train as a generalist, do their rotations in hospital and then choose their specialism, each student would have tried a bit of everything and trained to a decent degree in all of those things. And then they would specialise maybe with a major and a minor specialism, so to speak, as well as their general technique classes, which they, of course, continue as well. And that those specialisms would be supported by mentors. So someone would actually be working with you on that. And it would be based on your strengths, your identity, your career goals, rather than just assigned because of your sex or gender. And then it means that, because as you said, people do, as soon as you start talking about gender or gender non-specific, people do find it very jarring. And sometimes I've found when I'm trying to share this that they switch off right at the beginning. We can't do that, we can't do that. And actually, this is all going to be very similar for certain types of people. Their training journey won't look that different. So if you eventually become a 6'1", big, broad, cis man, your training journey probably looks very similar. There just might be a few different people in your class, but you are still going to go through, learn basic partnering, be in the gym doing your cross training, be the base in your lifts, and that is going to be your role because your physicality, your identity all suit that. So it's not cancelling anything. It's not taking away that person could still go in that direction. It just means that, you know, some of these trans or non-binary dancers who are becoming really prolific now, who are amazing, incredible assets to their ballet companies, they're kind of so far at the stage they're at in spite of the training systems that they've come through. And it would just mean that they could cross and be fluid between these specialisms in so much of an easier way, which of course then is going to be beneficial for their mental and physical well-being. And they haven't had to battle. They get to the same place eventually, but without the battle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And finally, it also just, for those cis dancers, well, for anyone, but this is particularly true with the cis dancers, anyone that fits outside of this very specific binary body standard of a woman in ballet and a man in ballet could now succeed, because if you are a 6-foot cis woman or a 5'5" cis man, but you're amazing, you might specialize in something different, whereas currently you're not welcome in a ballet.
Yeah, there isn't really a place for that.
Place.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was the point that when you were talking kind of jumped out at me too, because part of my background is in sport as well. And so oftentimes I'm looking at things through a lens of like sport science, and then applying it to dance science. And like sport and certain sports, and you mentioned rugby before, is like such a beautiful example of that, where like literally anyone can be a rugby player, and you're just playing different positions on the pitch based on, what your physical attributes are. So if you're petite and fast and, agile, you're probably going to be playing on a wing, versus if you're like stronger and more physical, you're going to be maybe the front row or something. And so there is a place for everyone. And in dance, we often lose that. Like you said, if you don't fit these like kind of stereotypes of the ideal body image, then it's like, well, there isn't really a place for you. And you're kind of just like, or I think what we see too, and especially like in North America, because at least where I am, like the competition dance world is huge. And so we see a lot of dancers who are steered away from ballet into other genres of dance based on things like their physicality or what their like natural body physique is like, even in instances where they're like, actually, I love ballet. Like that is the style that I love the most, but they'll kind of be told, well, you don't really fit the ideal for that. But if you wanted to go into, more commercial dance or into jazz or modern or things like that. And so there are a lot of dancers where you see them kind of end up being steered on different paths. But if there was this more diverse approach to ballet training, then a lot more dancers would probably be able to stay in ballet. And like you said, the vast majority are probably going to have a very similar experience to what they're having now, but it's going to, encompass all of those people who right now are sort of the outliers who get excluded from the ballet world.
Exactly, which is actually, as you've just said, so many people. We don't see them because they don't become prolific in ballet, but the majority of people will be excluded for one reason or another, whether that's physicality, identity. And, I've seen lots of examples of what you were saying about people being actually geared away from the idea of ballet due to something in their physicality. And I've seen a number of examples of that where actually their facility for ballet is very strong. They've got all the things that these people will say are the attributes that we want in ballet, although that's very much up for debate as well. But let's sake of argument, say that. And really what they mean when they say you haven't got the physicality is you're too broad, you're too tall, you're too whatever, or not enough, whatever.
Yeah.
And so what we're saying there is, okay, it's aesthetic then. You're talking about an aesthetic preference and not an ability issue. And so if we're talking about an aesthetic preference, we really have to not just blindly walk through the world, but actually think, okay, well, who's setting that? Well, of course, it's through the male lens, and it's a patriarchal approach. And then it also really layers. This is where, this has such an intersectional aspect to it, because it really speaks to what Western society thinks of as being beautiful. If we're talking about a woman in particular, as being very slim and slight and white and demure and elegant, and all those things makes you beautiful. And so this really layers in with race and ethnicity as well, and different body types that don't fit that exact mold but are still beautiful, but because some white man somewhere has decided that that's not the case, we're all blindly following that as being the ideal thing. And actually we can just question it and say, someone made it up, so we can also make up a new way that we decide to move forward with that.
And someone made it up like thousands of years ago. It's not even like current. It's just like, wait, why is this still a thing that we, kind of blindly follow? Absolutely.
Exactly.
So like we've been alluding to, there's definitely some resistance. I mean, so many things in the dance world. One of the biggest challenges is how steeped in tradition it is. And so people are often very resistant to change just for the sake of being resistant to change a lot of the time, or just because it's that very, mentality of like, well, this is how it's always been done. But in terms of like the pushback that you get or people's resistance to it, I imagine the partnering thing is one of like the biggest, but are there other areas that people are really like pushing back on as well?
So the partnering thing is probably the only or one of the only legitimate, so to speak, concerns, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Where, there are questions about how would we make this work safely? And I think it was really great because we discussed this in our group work at IADAMS, and people came up with some great arguments, which is mostly about, it's what we choose to make important. If it was important, like it is in contemporary dance, that different dancers can lift each other, then we would train for that. We're just not, because it's always been this way. And also the way that we think of as a classical pas de deux currently can still exist. There will just be other types of partnering as well. So a lot of modern choreography has lots of fluid partnering. So the partnering thing, is one question. But generally, the resistance that I get, there has been a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but a lot of the argument when someone comes up against it has been, well, it won't, you're sort of doing it for the sake of inclusivity in order to train in a way that won't then help them when they get out into the industry, because the industry is still binary. And my argument to that, having spoken to so many dancers on this, I've surveyed hundreds of dancers and focus groups and interviews, and that is dancers of a huge range of gender identities. And I can think of one dancer in particular who is a trans woman, and she trained and danced professionally for 8 or 9 years in a major international ballet company as a male dancer, and then transitioned. And she was saying, even in the traditional work, or even in a company of today's normal rep, she didn't feel that as a male dancer she was being fully trained for that industry, or the women that she was dancing with were not, because she was saying about, that they did a lot of killing in their company, and that the women dancers just did not know how to share weight with each other. The male dancers were often not as good with the more modern choreographies, ensemble work, and the way that corps de ballet has to move, because it's not just Swan Lake now as the corps de ballet. It's, how does a Crystal Pike corps de ballet work, and how you move as one, but you're all also very individual. So I think that even in the current way, we're only going to enrich and expand everybody's experience. But certainly when we start thinking about the kind of choreography that we're moving forward with, I think that we need to train dancers in a different way. And then finally, the main criticism that I tend to get doesn't actually have any basis to it as far as I can tell. Like, I really try and pull out, because people do get really upset at what I'm proposing. It really seems to hit people hard, and they come at me, especially on social media, as you can imagine. I get loads of support and loads of amazing feedback, and people are excited about what I talk about with this. And then obviously I get hate from people as well, and it's social media, so it's exacerbated to probably what they would say to me in person. And when I delve into it, because I'm like, no, I really want to know, like, what's the problem, because then we can find solutions, they just say things like, the world has gone mad. Oh, everything's so woke now. There's no like substance really to like what actual basis. Yeah, they just don't like it. It's really the crux of it.
And like, to be honest, those people probably aren't even from the ballet world. Like, they probably are just people on the internet, on social media, like, who knows? And so, like you said, it's not necessarily a basis for an argument. One thing I want to circle back to just briefly too with the partnering thing is, what we see often when partnering is first being introduced, especially in like, you know, kind of younger dancers in maybe like vocational or pre-professional training programs, is female dancers generally are going to go through their adolescent growth spurt before male dancers are. Yeah. And so when we start to introduce these partnering classes, when the dancers are maybe like 13, 14, oftentimes the female dancers are actually physically much larger than the male dancers anyway. And so you get this like imbalance that's happening where they actually can't learn certain partnering things, or they're actually being sort of like held back a little bit because of that difference, because those male dancers may not go through a growth spurt until they're 15, 16, like a bit later. And so this idea that like it's, you know, going to be unsafe, or we can't have like females like, you know, lifting males and stuff. When we're first learning those skills, like actually from a physical perspective, the females are probably stronger, bigger than the males are when we're first introducing it, obviously, as they continue to grow. And so it's one of those things that I've always felt was such a like sort of silly argument when you go into like in like, you know, very basic entry level partnering class. More often than not, like the male dancers are much, much smaller, and you kind of look at it and you're like, all right, well.
Yeah. And I think there's a massive psychological component to that as well. So in my research, it's continuously coming up. And I can think of in my focus group in particular that I did with a range of 10 dancers, all in full-time training of different gender identities. And the cis men in that group repeatedly talked about the pressure that they felt in partnering classes. So I kind of knew that the women dancers would say about their pressure to be very thin and very light in partnering, and we talked a lot about that, and we know that that contributes to disordered eating and terrible eating disorders and all sorts of things that are prevalent for women ballet dancers. But the men were really emphasizing that they felt this pressure to be these big, bulky, strong, muscular, and that they had felt that since early teenage years, when they're just, you know, these tiny little skinny arms and all of that sort of thing. And even at this point when, you know, one of the dancers I'm thinking of, who was 21 during this focus group, he was saying every pas de deux class, he is pushing his body so hard because he's so scared everyone will go out and laugh that he's too weak. And like you say, that growth spurt, but they're going to continue to be growing into their mid-20s, and so you just think, gosh, that pressure is both ways round. And if the whole thing was more, let's all learn these different skills,
and everybody had a chance to experience all of it, then
we really wouldn't feel that same pressure. And I think we've talked for many years, again looking at wider society, about the pressure on women and girls from media. And, you know, when we were younger, it was all the magazines and the programs on TV and things, and now it's social media. And since it's social media, that pressure is very much on young boys as well, to be these, you know, big gym bros, and that's the aesthetic that they aspire to. And so the pressure goes both ways. So let's just not do that, because it doesn't really make sense for anyone.
Absolutely. All right. I'm aware of the time, but before we wrap up, if there are, especially, like I know we have a lot of teachers that listen to the podcast, and even a lot of dance parents, but especially teachers, if there are teachers who are listening who are like, yes, like I identify with this is the way forward. Are there things that you would suggest, like small changes? Because obviously we're not changing the entire industry. And like you said, like these dancers, we can change what we're doing in our own studios or in our own training centers, but eventually we are preparing them for potentially careers in the professional world, which isn't going to change as quickly. But are there things that teachers could implement sort of right away or fairly quickly that would sort of help to lead down this path, knowing that we're still operating within like a very gendered ballet world?
Yeah, so especially if I was speaking to a teacher in maybe like a local setting, I'd be thinking about language, first of all. So just, again, ungendering my language and not assigning things to certain genders. So just being much more open and reflective of myself, of things. You know, I still catch myself all the time thinking that a certain thing is for a certain type of person. And then you have to just reflect and think, gosh, no, I've been told that. It doesn't need to be that way. So language would be one. Themes would be another. Let's really explore themes and qualities. And again, not say, you have to do this very strong and you need to do this dainty. Let's all try lots of different things. Let's use a piece of music. And now let's change the piece of music to something much stronger and see how we respond, because that is versatile artistry. And the third, little slightly longer term change, but still relatively easy, I think, if you're in charge of your own training, is dress codes. So I would just say, from so many perspectives, gender, body positivity, body neutrality, all of those things, change the dress code. I don't think we need to do the leotard and tights thing, but some will want to. So
yes, absolutely.
And that's fine. It's like everything that already exists will still exist, but just wider options. So I would say I kind of recommend like a capsule collection, mix and match. You've got T-shirts and shorts and tights and leotards and leggings and socks and all different things. And every dancer can mix and match those however they see fit, rather than the boys get to come in a T-shirt and baggy shorts and that's kind of okay. And I'm constantly battling with like colleagues, for example, who sort of say, oh yeah, but we'll let the boys, because they can be quite uncomfortable coming in if they haven't done much ballet. And I think, tell me a girl
who feels comfortable in her tights and leotard.
Yeah, and loves wearing a leotard with no bra and a pair of tights, and they might be on their period today, and but we just don't care. They just have to do it.
Yeah.
So again, it's just instilling this, like, if we're going to be flexible, let's be flexible for everybody.
Yeah. And especially for little boys too, because I know when my son was little, like, he was really into dress up, and, you get lots of little boys in a ballet class who they are probably the only little boy, but all the little girls have skirts and tutus and stuff. And so the little boy probably wants to do that as well. And so again, to have it go both ways, that it's not just like, yes, the girls can wear less form-fitting clothing, but also like there are lots of little boys who may want to have the like tutu or the skirt because they're in a ballet class and they want to explore that as well. And so to have it, like you said, I love the idea of just like a capsule wardrobe. Here are all the pieces that go with our studio dress code. Pick and choose, mix and match, whatever you're comfortable with.
Exactly. And I know that's one of the things that makes people really, really uncomfortable. I'm the same with I've got 2 sons, and I'm the same. Wear what you want, explore whatever, it's really not that deep if you want to dress up as a whatever princess today or whatever. But I know that really makes people feel like it's a difficult topic. But again, I would just invite people to just gently reflect, because I judge a lot of competitions, and I have seen, hundreds of duets, let's say, with 2 girls, and they want to do a boy-girl duet. So one of them has got a bowler hat and a moustache painted on and hair in a low bun, right? We have no problem.
No issue, yeah.
A girl dressing up as a boy. But if it went the other way, oh my gosh, it would be woke craziness. What are all these snowflakes doing? And it's like, okay, so let's just reflect on why we're comfortable with a tomboy girl, to use that kind of traditional terminology, but a more effeminate boy, again, to use that sort of terminology, is really uncomfortable to us. And it's something we're putting upon them and we're indoctrinating them. And it's like, no, we're just not making it that deep if they just want to wear something that's pink or whatever. It just
and especially in a setting where it's like all, potentially little girls and one little boy, he probably just doesn't want to feel signaled out and left out. And in some ways that's probably like more isolating and alienating for little boys to be, they're already the only boy in a class, but they might not notice that, except for then we make it that. And so we're saying, oh, well, you're the boy, and therefore, you have to wear the different outfit. You have to do the different choreography. You have to do this. Whereas, at young ages, especially, they just want to be in the class with all of the other people who they're friends with and dance, and they want to be probably treated exactly the same. And so, yes, we as society are like making them feel different. But like you said, it's not that deep.
Yeah, that's the crux of it. We're putting it on them. We think, we want to make the decisions for that. We've got to tell them that this is a certain thing. It's actually us putting those stereotypes onto them, not the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. We could talk about this forever. I love this conversation. I think there's so many other areas we could dive into, but I'm aware of the time, and I always love to finish off the guest episodes with 5 sort of rapid fire questions. So if you will indulge me, first question, what's your favorite genre or style of dance?
Modern ballet.
Okay. Would you rather be on stage or in the studio?
Oh, I think in the studio, I love being on stage, but I get more fire out of the process. I just love it.
Yeah. If you could dance with or share the stage with any dancer, past or present, who would it be and why?
I'm going to go. So I've got a current, bit of an obsession with, do you know the dancer Madeleine Wu, San Francisco ballet? She's, all right, I literally don't even know this person.
Okay.
I just follow her on Instagram. But I'm just kind of obsessed because I just think she's such a great example of not this ultra conforming ballet perfect princess. She's covered in tattoos. She's always showing the kind of traditional male steps that she can double tour and double assemble and all these things. And she's just kind of not, it's like she's somehow avoided this socialization as this perfect girl ballet dancer, and she's just kind of doing her own thing. So I would just love to create something for her. That would just be a dream, and just to speak to her and find out, how did you not get sucked into this perfect ballet girl thing? So I think she's amazing.
Amazing. All right. What is one thing you would go back and tell your younger self as a dancer?
You're going to be able to do it the way that you want to do it, and find a path where you get to do all the things you love, and just embrace that and don't limit yourself, I think.
Amazing. All right. Finally, and I have a hunch I might know the answer to this question already, but if there's one thing you could change about the dance world, what would it be?
I mean, there's so many things. So I think if I could put it down to one thing that then broadens even above what I'm talking about, I would change the fact that people think it's so difficult to change, because this is not something that just we discovered when, humans first evolved. We created all this stuff. Everything is made up, and so we can make it up again. And so I think that, we can't do that because it won't work. I would change that. I would change that thing of let's have an open mind and let's just talk about what it might look like and how we might get there.
Yeah, and how change is possible. And I mean, we have the same pushback when anytime we're trying to implement dance science of any type, and it's that, we can't possibly do that. And it's like, actually, we probably could. Yeah. All right. This has been such a fabulous conversation. Like I said, we could probably chat forever, but I will not take up any more of your time. But before we say goodbye, how can listeners connect with you if they want to learn more about your research or just follow you on social media or any of those things? What's the best way to connect?
So I'm probably most active on Instagram, which is at Anna Morgan Dance. And I will be sharing in the next month all of my MA research, rather than you having to read a 15,000 word dissertation. It'll all be in nice little bite-sized social media. And then people can DM me on there if they want to get in touch, and that's probably the easiest way.
Perfect. Awesome. And I will link that in the show notes for anybody who is listening and wants to reach out. I will put your Instagram in there. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat. I think this is such an important conversation for us to be having, especially in the ballet world, but in the dance world in general. So I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to chat with me.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you too for having me.
Awesome. Have a great rest of your day. And I hope everybody who's listening also has a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.